when people think about being prophetic, people think about, well, I need to have a certain prophetic power, position, and they're thinking authority to be able to do that work. And it actually is not the case. In Bible, in fact, you have prophets that were of God, and oftentimes the prophets that weren't of God were what you would call what I would describe as court prophets. Those were in serving the king. And I don't think those were people that started out as bad guys, but something happened along the way in which their understanding of what it means to speak for God became, you could say it was watered down, distorted, or somewhere along the way they lost their voice so that they wound up speaking for the power, right? And so there's almost this inverse relationship, um, that you can see this throughout scripture as well as in real life. I think many of us can speak to people who were once very vocal and they were very active in giving voice to marginalized positions and power. Then they get into positions of power, and they lose their voice and they backtrack. I can think of many, many examples of people who were advocates for the marginalized. Um, and then somehow they attain some positional power and then they backtrack. They retract. They scrub the web for their voices. And it's a great temptation for all of us, I think. So I think about that in terms of myself as well. So, how many times I feel tempted to justify a movement toward having more positional power. But in so doing, I realize immediately now just how much that would be at the cost of speaking honestly, truthfully, openly about certain issues. And I think so we could see this in ourselves, we could see this in scripture. And I'm not saying that therefore all who are in power are bad, but I think those who are in power who are vocal would be the first to point out the problematic nature of power for us. And I also say this in the context of biblical examples of people like Esther, Queen Esther, who actually, even though she was queen, she was actually, her issue was that she did not have power in that situation. So she risks everything to step into this place, to speak into something for the sake of justice for the people who are endangered. And she realizes that in her lack of power, she has power. You think about somebody also like Martin Luther King Jr., who had probably one of the most profound effects of modern justice in America, for sure. Um, and he did that without any positional power. Who was he really that he was able to do so much of this work? And I think what he was able to do was to do this work, transformational work, at the flat level, of grassroots level, agitating, speaking, giving voice, and making sure that other people heard. And in that, his legitimacy was based on people saying, yeah, that person is one of us. When you look at how transformation happens in organizations, in fact, that's most people who study that stuff will say that that's exactly how real transformation takes place, not from this hierarchical top down sort of a way. Top down sort of a thing creates defensiveness, people who are willing to go along with things, but there is a resistance and there is rarely true transformation. But when there is a movement that stirs the people at their level, then true transformation can occur. So I think it all goes along with observations of scripture as well as observations of how true change happens.